So today we are going to have Faiz Malkani, who is the co-founder and head of product at Ripple and also a mentor at Google for Startups. He's also the organizer for GDG Mumbai, right? And all the events, the tech community events that happen are mostly organized by him or are helped by him, right? So he's here today to talk about design theory, and how you can basically use that in your whole career as a development, which you will not, but still, since we did not have any other topic, right? So yeah, over to Faiz. So please.
Okay. What do all of you guys think is most important to us as Indians? What do we love the most? TikTok, Instagram Reels, that doesn't count. Sorry? Family drama. Okay, that's close enough to what I'm hoping as an answer. Any other ideas? Culture. I don't think that matters to us here. I mean, what allows more? Vada pav or McDonald's? Politics, somewhat. What about free stuff? Hmm? You know that whole cultural thing of going to buy. You want to take that on speaker? Okay. You know that whole cultural thing of going to buy. I'm just probably seen your moms doing it at some point. You go to buy dhania for like $10 and you ask for ₹1 of curry patta for free. It's a massive phenomenon in most Indian households. So you're buying something for 10 rupees and you want something of ₹1 for free, but we will not let that go. You will make sure that the vegetable seller gives it to you, even though it's $1. So we like cheap stuff and we like free stuff more than anything else. Right now, all of us agree on this. Now that I've established that, look at Ola and Uber. Right? Both are massive user bases in India. Which do you think has a larger market share? Ola? Okay. Can you tell me why? Because in 95% of use cases, Ola is more expensive than an Uber. Right? And most people agree that the quality of cars isn't as great, quality of drivers isn't as great. It's more expensive. Why does it have a larger market share? Because the way it's designed is very Indian. Okay? It has loud colors. It has a lot of noise, lot of clutter happening on the screen, as opposed to Uber, which looks very premium. It's cheaper, but looks very premium, right? It's black and white. It has a lot of square edges, no fancy colors. And because of that, you have your tier 2, tier 3, and onward, or even tier 1 audiences who perceive Ola as being more for them rather than a product like Uber, which is way more economical, way better user experience. But just by understanding design correctly, by understanding culture of Indian design correctly, they're able to capture roughly 15% more market share than what Uber has, right? So as much as marketing, as much as discounts, all of that matters for adopting anything, apps, websites, all of that. Understanding whom your user is and building an experience that's very tailored for them is one of the key differentiators in setting apart your product from the others, right? What I'm going to do the next hour or so is walk you through a deck that I had originally made for internal use at Google, where we were talking about the right way to do design. Currently, everyone knows the wrong way. You open up Figma, you open up Adobe, and you just put your thoughts on paper, right? Some of us may go one step further by figuring out who our audience demographic is, what that kind of persona is, and then putting thoughts on Figma. But there's a lot more that goes into that theory, and we're going to walk through some best practices and then figure out what the right way is. I'm also going to be skipping a bunch of stuff because part of the presentation was catered towards like a 8 to 10 year experience audience. So let's skip over some of that stuff, but we'll cover like 80% of it. Okay. Now, UX, like any other field out there, has a set of laws that are golden truths, right? And these aren't subjective. They are actual tested and proved theories on how you can design products. I'm not going to dive into them in this presentation because there are about 15 of them. But if you go to lawsofux.com, It covers each law of design and also justifies why this law applies and in what cases it can be used. The underlying point here is that design, while it might seem like a very creative process, that you might things have to look good and things have to come from an artistic mindset. Growing up, that was what people assumed of me, right? So whenever you tell people you're a designer, people start asking first question: were you creative as a child? Did you like drawing as a child? Now it has nothing to do with art. Design is data backed, it's science backed. People wrongly assume that it's a creative process. Unfortunately for me, I actually used to draw as a kid, so I had to say yes. And then without waiting for me to explain this, people were like, "Oh, that's why you became a designer." Um, we also tend to have this bias called aesthetic usability effect, which makes us think that just because something is designed better, it has a better user experience, right? And this is where the distinction between UI and UX becomes very sharp contrasted. You can have something that looks great and works terribly, and you can have something that works absolutely fantastic for the user but looks like absolute crap. And my go-to example for this is Educator as a product. Looks like trash, and I can say that confidently without insulting him because I actually designed that, and we intentionally designed it to look bad. But UX is phenomenal. The amount of time it takes to get from opening the app to figuring out what time your train is going to come is like 3 clicks at most, and by most people is done in under 3.5 seconds. We optimized for that. We didn't optimize at all for UI. Um, that is itself a different conversation. But just because something is pleasing doesn't mean it's good UX. The takeaway here is that you might go on Dribble or other design inspiration sites, copy elements from there, copy elements from popular apps that you use, and make something that looks fantastic. But until you go into the UX process, your product isn't probably doing very well when it reaches consumers. Okay. Now, people's behavior is rapidly changing, right? This was more relevant maybe a couple of years ago, but it's getting worse now to the point where everyone is spending more time with their phones than with people around them. And it's become more second nature to us to spend time with people than it is to use a phone. Earlier, it was you're spending most of your life talking to people, and a couple of hours in a day you're with your phone. It's the other way around now. Most of your day you're alone with your phone, and few hours in the day you're with other people. As alarming as it is, that's not the problem that we need to deal with. We are focusing more on how that affects uh, everything, right? Building, launching, entrepreneurship, all of that. Now, you would assume that because people are spending so much time with their phone, their rate of using apps, websites, tools is going to go higher. The quick example here: if all of you had to download an app on your phone, and you open it up and you see a white screen for the first time, what would you do? It doesn't load, it doesn't do anything, it just blank white. Sorry, close and open. What else? Try tapping the screen, see if anything happens. Check your internet connection. Right? Um, I have had varied responses to this. I've also had some people who say I wait, which is on the nicer side of things. Some people say that I will go on Google Play, I'll give a 1-star review, I'll find where the developer lives, and go to his house and ask why it doesn't work. Extreme other end of things. Um, However, 25% of users are not going to give that second chance to the app. They're not going to do everything that you did. They're going to just uninstall because while people are spending more time with their phones, and because of that, people are using more products, that also means people are developing more products. 10 years ago, if someone had to ask you which design tool is available, it was only Photoshop. Right? GIMP was there, but not mass market. Everyone was doing UI design in Photoshop. Now you have 10 prominent design tools that people are using, which means people are spoiled for choice. So when your product doesn't work for them, they're going to uninstall, right? And 25% is an alarming number of people who are not going to give you a second chance, much less people who try 2 times, 3 times, and then abandon. This is just first time abandons. Now this highlights how right from the very beginning, before even your login flow starts, you have to optimize for that user experience. Right? Imagine you're spending $100 on marketing your app. 25 is an absolute waste if you're not optimizing the first screen itself. Now, this deck is geared more towards it uses terminology that is from an app mindset, but 90% of these things also cater to broad tech products, right? Websites, anything that you're building. Now, let's explore starting with how to do navigation in a product, how to do search and discoverability. If you're doing e-commerce, what are best practices? Login and onboarding, data collection, and usability. So 6 broad areas of where products need to optimize their user experience. Now, starting with navigation and exploration. The moment people come to your website or app, you're tempted to do splash screens, which are like fancy animations showing your free logo. You're tempted to do like a landing page that just talks about some intellectual line about what your website does. The reality is that most people are not going to give you more affordability than the first scroll that you arrive on or the first screen that you land on. Now imagine a site like Make My Trip or an app like Uber, which when you land on it, Make My Trip says that we are a website that helps you do your bookings, and this is how we help you. We can do flights, hotels, all of that, right? Similarly, Uber will tell you that when you open the app, the first thing they say is we'll help you get from place to place B, and these are the options that we offer. You would probably not use them because the effort that it takes to get from those landing pages to what the product actually provides is massive. But they optimize for your experience. At the moment you land, you have a departure airport, arrival airport, and date options on Make My Trip right there. On Uber, you directly have a where are you going, right? In 1 or 2 clicks, you're able to get the value from your product without having to go through a bunch of information that they throw at you. Right? So, right in the beginning, don't try to show off who you are or what you do. Just give your value up front. In as few clicks as possible, can you have people drive some valuable experience from what your product offers? If you're doing categorization or labels, don't forget organization, right? And when you're doing organization, do it in a way that is very homogeneous for the end user. A lot of e-commerce products out there, when you pick a fashion brand, right, like something like Myntra, you can sort shoes by men's and women's in the beginning, right? You can then sort by use case, hiking, running, walking, all of that. Now, great user experience because it works for a company like Myntra, right? That is probably what you're thinking. How many people actually know the difference between a hiking shoe and a walking shoe and a running shoe? Very few. Right? So while the categorization sounds great at their end, there is room for improvement for them, for the end user, because they're not speaking the people's language. The average audience for a website like Myntra thinks of shoes in terms of daily wear, party wear, and maybe outdoor for hiking, right? Things like categorization, like, and I know especially you have Adidas and Nike and all of these websites who do even further categorizations like cricket shoes and tennis shoes, all of that, right? And these are minor differences in how these products are made, but the end user probably doesn't know who they are. They can get away with it because they have a little more, I'd say, a shoe enthusiast audience who's willing to drop like 5,000-6,000 rupees on a pair of shoes. So that audience probably is going to do a little bit more of research before buying the product. But an average product which caters to a generic audience like Myntra should ideally optimize for the language that the end users speak, not for something that sounds great internally. Okay. If you keep your GPS off, right, which a lot of people do because battery drain is higher on phones with GPS on, the experience when you open any food delivering app is absolutely terrible because these apps are built to keep your location on. So the moment you open up the app, you can just start ordering, right? The moment you have your location off and you open the app, you get this blocking screen that says enter your location or auto detect manually. And if you don't want to turn it on an auto detect, you type like your 5-6 characters of your location until it comes up in a suggestion. crappy experience. And you want to get to the ordering point. Now, there's no way around it because of the user's location is off, it's off. But allow people to switch between these options easily. If you looked at Swiggy 7 years ago, just about when it launched, it forced you to pick your location from its auto detection provider and then let you do a manual input. But they realize that that's not how people think, right? People want to have the option of three. There are three options that when you open up the app: auto detect, typing out an entire address, or selecting from your last used addresses. Right now, this is the best case that you can solve it for because you're letting people have the choice, letting them choose how they want to do the input rather than enforcing anything on them. So if you're doing location at any point, put the control in the user's hands. And this applies across the board for any features you're doing. As wherever possible, if you can let users take control rather than trying to solve something for them, you will have a much less frustrating product for people to use. Okay. If you're doing search or discoverability, understand that you have got to the point where people aren't able to find anything on the homepage. That's when you do search. If you're a website that's offering like 3 or 4 things on right over there, you can put them on the landing page, and people will not need to search. The moment you have the need to search, it means naturally that you've got to the point where there are so many things that people are first reaction is going to be a come and search, right? Take a contrast of like an app like an Instagram store, right, which sells like 3 or 4 things at most, versus Amazon that I think has like 500 million listings on the store. The default behavior on Amazon is very rarely I want to go and browse the homepage. It's almost always I know what I want to buy, so when I go, I'm going to click on the search bar immediately. Now, if you're in that situation, if your app or your website is in that situation, understand that people's first instinct is search. So don't have a very hidden search menu that is people click on an icon, then a field pops up, then they start typing. Right? Accept that search is your entry point for the user journey and put it as prominently as possible and optimize for that experience over anything else. Because if people are able to successfully search and find what they're looking for, that conversion to a purchase is going to be much easier. And while they're searching, it's very likely that they're going to search for something that they've already searched for. Because statistically, very few people check out something on the first time that they look at a product. That number is below 25%. Right? So it's if you look at it from a pure mathematical perspective, the second time that they're coming to the app, it's very likely that they already looked at something the first time and they're coming back to revisit it. Maybe just look at it again, or they're ready to buy. But again, pure data backed decision. People are coming back because they looked at something once. Wherever possible, try to auto populate that search for them on multiple data points. And the easy one is this: you search for something in the past, can we put it in front of you? There are better ways to optimize search experience also. Can you do based on what people are searching around you? Geographical trend. What people similar to you have purchased? Demographic categorization. Factor all of these in and make sure that that experience of finding what they need is reduced to as few clicks as possible. And when you're testing this, go in with the assumption that I don't know what I want to buy. Right? And then figure out how easily can you make that I don't know mindset into a this is what I want to buy mindset. How many of you believe reviews on Amazon and Flipkart? Believe them. Okay. What if you see a product that is massively underpriced? Right? So you go on Amazon and you see an iPhone for like 5,000 bucks, and all the reviews say it's great. Do you still believe them? Why? Scam. Right? Default mindset. Now, with the way e-commerce is penetrating most markets, and prices are all over the place and quality is all over the place because Amazon and Flipkart are not factoring in who comes and sells. Anyone can come and sell. Skepticism in e-commerce, where you don't trust the site or the seller, has gone up about 500% in the past 3 years. Right? This changes massively when you're buying from a D2C brand. D2C brands are where the brand is directly supplying you rather than supplying through Amazon. If you go on Boat's website and you're trying to buy a pair of earphones, a trust factor is almost never going to come in. You're buying from Boat, they're going to ship it directly to you themselves. You're not going to wonder, is it original? Is the quality good? Quality maybe, but is it original? Probably not going to come in. Am I going to have a good experience? Probably not, because I came on board for a reason, right? That decision is going to be much easier to make. Whereas if it's an aggregator like Amazon, you're going to have people wondering, did other people have a good experience? Is this genuine? Is it authentic? Is it giving the value for money that it asks for? And then people turn to reviews. Now, if all the reviews right up top are giving overwhelmingly positive feedback, you're going to not tend to believe it. Most consumers and this is not something that I believe, it's actually market data. Most consumers, if they see overwhelmingly positive feedback on any e-commerce product, they start to look for the negative feedback. And you'll probably notice this pattern in yourself. If everything seems very positive, you start to look for negative. If there are 500 5-star reviews, but there are 10 1-star reviews, you'll start to see what did people say when they reviewed 1-star. So try to find what, because we tend to believe that the people speaking negative are the people being real, right? So if you have reviews on your site, let people find that real story in the review process. Let them sort and filter reviews. Let people go through the summaries of the review, what other people have put up themselves. And where someone has really done this fantastically is if you look at Amazon now, they summarize all the review content for you, right? We talk about Gen AI almost every day in the tech world of how it can be used. But unfortunately, as much as revenue that ChatGPT is bringing in, it's still in a browser and it's terrible UX to use. You have to go to the website, you have to type in your text there. It's not coming when you need it, how you need it. Amazon is one of the few examples that has absolutely nailed the use case for generative AI, right? It's taking thousands of reviews and summarizing it into one paragraph of text. You get an idea of what people are saying. It's not only positive because it's a summary of everything that's said. Right? So it gives people more trust in the platform. So a platform can talk about the bad things also, but still push the good things. You're more likely to make a purchase. Okay. Now, this is one area where mobile apps particularly suffer because, and I'll tell you where the decision comes from. So I work in, I'm a founder, right? I work in strategy. I know that the amount of money it costs to get a lead, right, which is to get one person interested in the product and to get their data, phone number, email ID, anything to communicate with them. That acquisition cost per lead is on the lower side, 50 rupees per user. On the higher side, you have products like Cred and Scaler that are spending about 2000 rupees per user. And that is insane. But that's not the point here. Because of how much it costs to acquire one user lead, businesses try to put login screens right up front. Right? Because now if you have downloaded the app or if you've come to the website and they put a login screen right up front, they have immediately captured your phone number or email ID or some way to communicate with you. This allows them to spam you until you are dead. Every single day you will get an email from them saying, buy my product, sale on my product, buy this, buy that. And it's very likely, and of course data backs this up, it's very likely that you will make a purchase one day when they keep spamming you every day. Maybe you don't, but 10%, 15% of the people will. And that's enough ROI for them. Because they did spam you, that spamming cost them absolutely nothing. But 10% sales, great conversion. But the end user, when coming to an app or a website, and the first thing they see is a login screen, only works for large brands. If Amazon tells you log in and then see what we're offering, you'll do it because you know Amazon is providing value to you. If Uber does it, again, you know Uber is providing value to you. But what if it's an app that you've never heard of or a website you've never heard of? You land over there, you have probably one more alternative to it open in another tab. One tells you its value upfront. One tells you first log in, put your phone number, we'll send you an OTP, then put an OTP, then we'll show you what value we give, you will close it. You have an option available right there. Why will you spend time and effort on doing all of this? So when you're launching, when you're building, and you don't have the backing of a large brand, try to give as much value as you can to the user without asking them for data. And of course, there will be times in life where you come across teams you're working with, founders that you're working with, product managers you're working with, who will tell you the opposite. Because, like I said, they want that data. There's no right or wrong here, right? Because as a designer or a developer, you need to optimize for UX. As a strategist, they need to optimize for business. Try to find the balance. What a lot of apps do, and you can particularly see this with Instagram and Pinterest on the web, they give you a preview of the value that they can provide, right? You'll maybe see, but if you the moment you try to interact or click, they'll tell you to log in. I don't remember how Pinterest does it, but I know Instagram on the web, you can probably view one post or one reel. The moment you try to watch it again, it tells you to log in. This is the balance. I have never used Instagram in my life. I have absolutely no idea how it works. Suna hai, but I think that's how it works. The point is, give some value, not all of it, and then try to capture the user's lead. This is the typical way to balance business needs and consumer needs. Um, when you're building forms, right, and this can be anything from an OTP entry form to putting out user's address, don't just build because you want to get the work done with. Form filling is the highest friction in any user's journey throughout using a tech product, because it is the place where you optimize for 1-2 clicks for the landing page, but here people forget that to put a name is alone like 20 clicks just to type your name in. Don't overlook this part of the process, right? As there are lots of tools out there are lots of options out there to make form filling as painless as possible. Optimize for those things. Don't ignore how important it is to fill forms. Something as simple as an OTP form. I'm sure all of you have used at least one website where you try to paste an OTP and only paste in that first box, right? Or the moment you're typing, there's a slight delay, so the second number you type overrides the first number. Or apps that don't auto read the OTPs from your SMS. Crappy experiences all around, right? And again, I keep going back to the point, in a world where there are so many options, this is going to leave you not very happy with the option that you have in front of you. You're going to look for alternatives. So wherever possible, especially if you're building a mobile app, your native platforms, both Android and iOS, let you autofill so many fields by just changing one value in the process when you're building it. So as a developer, if you're putting a text field out there, just adding a name attribute to it is not something that comes naturally because you want to just put it and see how it looks. But stopping for like half a second and putting that attribute lets devices autofill that value for you, right? In a form that has 10 fields, that half a second adds up to 5 seconds in total. So 5 seconds extra on the development side leads to saving about 30-40 clicks on the end user side. Now I keep reinforcing all of these points and they sound very simple and very basic things. That is intentional because as developers, and I've been on that journey myself, all of this is there and we know all of this, but the moment you start working, it all goes out of the window because there are timelines, there are deadlines, there is one product manager who's looking over your shoulder all the time. It's important to keep all of these basics in mind at the time also. Just learning about it is completely pointless. And at the same time, when you're doing form filling, make sure your errors are being communicated in real time. Telling people when they click on the submit button that your name ka spelling was wrong, or only number of values are allowed in the phone number field and they added a plus value, is probably one of the worst things that you can do to a user because they have just spent a solid 3-4 minutes filling out a form based on how long yours is, right? And then you click on submit and then you tell them to go back, they are going to immediately start hating you. There is one step worse that you can go. When they click on submit, you clear the entire form and then tell them to edit it. Right? And there are apps and websites that do it. You probably had that experience yourself. If not, go and thank whatever god you worship. But otherwise, when you're building, make sure that in real time you're communicating what's going wrong. The moment they put a value into your field, validate it right there and then. This is a significant increase in development time from your end. It's not one of those easy fixes, right? Because Typically, if you've understood how validation works, all of you are what, first year students, right? Okay. So typically when you write code and you're sending it to a backend server, and the server will reply with error values, and then you'll tell the user. That is why the bad process of validation happens. Now, as a developer, if you can fetch that server validation form first and then communicate that before sending the return value to the server, you're going to increase development time by about 25% per form that you do. Right now, sounds difficult because 25% is significant, but the value add that you add to the user is definitely worth it. Again, while you're building mobile apps specifically, actually nowadays even web can do this. You are given a flag, like an option in your input field, to specify the type of input. Is it text? Is it numbers? Is it even more detailed? Is it an email ID? Is it an address? And based on that, the platform will change the keyboard it gives the user. Telling the platform that this is a phone number field, so I want a number keyboard, is again 2 seconds in of development effort. But the user experience when they open up the field and they can just type large numbers without having to switch to the number keyboard, type small buttons there, is it adds up. Right? All of these things are very small, but they add up to our overall user experience improving massively. And in the same form, wherever possible, provide some info or context. Right now, imagine if you're filling out a form and you're ordering something online, and they ask you for your name, which is fine. They ask you for email address, which is also fine. They ask you for address, still okay, because at this point you're expecting an e-commerce site to ask for all of these things. What if they start asking you for your birthday? Now this is something that e-commerce sites do, right? Because they want to send you something for free, maybe in your birth month. But imagine in your checkout flow, you're buying something and they ask you for your birthday. You're going to get suspicious immediately. What do they want? What if they ask you what time are you home? Either you're getting robbed, which is what you might think, but in reality, they just want to make sure that you're there when they get your package. But without that context, the suspicion is there. Like, why do they need this data? So whenever you're putting inputs in front of the user, make sure you're telling them why you need the data. You can skip this for basic stuff like name and email ID and phone number, but anything out of the ordinary, tell the user, because you lose almost nothing by being proactively informative. Uh, this is something that I call out, especially in younger developers. When you're building, we tend to go on this intellectual loop where your idea sounds great to you. You've got a bunch of thoughts on how you want to build and launch and get in front of users. And up till this point in your head, everything sounds great. Then you're going to start going into the branding part of what you're building. You're going to name your app. If you come up with something that is not spellable, if I tell it to you, that's where your first mistake is. Right? Imagine if I tell you like something like Dribble, right, which is a popular design inspiration site. Dribble as a word, Dribble. If you type it on Google, you will never find the product because they use 3 B's instead of 2 B's. But the actual 2B version is also a basketball term. When you're branding, start by thinking how the user will interact with your product. Don't have stuff that is difficult to spell. Don't have stuff that if I can hear it, I'm not sure what spelling to use. Don't have stuff that is Hindi brand names are fine, but when you transcribe them to English, is it 1A, is it 2A's? I used to build a product called Avaz. We have seen 18 different variations on the spelling of Avaz. In hindsight, terrible decision. We regret it every day. But the end user doesn't know how we wanted to spell it. 2A's, 1A, V instead of W. We've seen everything, right? Now this also caters to in-app stuff. The branding stuff, a lot of people will tell you, this is how you do it. But inside your app also, this matters. How you name your navigation fields, how you name different parts of your product. Also, you're tempted to do them in line with your original brand, but keep the user experience also in mind. If 20 years ago someone told you to put out a tweet, you would think they're insane. What the hell is a tweet? Right? Now, Twitter was born during the golden age of the internet, so they could build their brand over time to the point where a tweet became a verb, right? But for other brands trying to do this now are going to fail because you're not going to instantly know what that word means. Still, some of the larger brands can pull it off. A reel, a story are all branding terms. They don't make sense for the user. Now we know them in the form they are because companies like Instagram have pushed that in front of us. But when you're small, you don't have that budget that they do. So don't try to be intellectual when you're naming your things. Make it as obvious as possible so that people are spending less time figuring out what it is and more time actually using it. And in your product, whenever you're taking user feedback, I don't mean the literal 5-star wala feedback, any interaction, this could be a button, this could be tap to open, any of that. In real time, communicate to the user that they have interacted with something in the app. If you have an e-commerce app, like an Amazon app on your phone, and you click on the add to cart button and nothing happens, going back to my earlier example, you will try to click again, you will check your internet connection, you'll try to go back and come there again. But they've added it to the cart, they just not told you. In real time, communicate with the user whenever they interact with you and confirm their interaction with them. Just show, Amazon shows a button that this is added to cart, right? And this gives you the assurance that when I clicked, something happened. So wherever possible, and look at every field or every interaction in your app and confirm to the user something is happening. And even if nothing is happening and you can't confirm, just an animation on your button confirms to the user that they did receive the input. This is again a very niche use case, but if you're doing zoom at any point in your app, this could be an image, this could be a map, any of that, give people complete control. Zoom is one of those things where everyone wants it in a very different way. Some people might want it massively zoomed in, some people want an overview. And I'll give you a real world example where this absolutely fails. So when you're opening Uber and you're waiting for your cab to come to you, try zooming and see what happens. 1 second later, it zooms out and shows you the overview again. I didn't want to see the overview. I zoomed in for a particular reason, right? I wanted it to stay on a zoomed in view because maybe I wanted to see where the driver is. I don't need to see where my house is. I know where I live, but they're assuming zoom for you. Now again, billion-dollar company can get away with it, but smaller apps, especially what all of you are going to build, hobby projects can't get away with it because users aren't forgiving. That just something as small as changing the zoom factor when they control it in the first place starts causing negativity, right? And everything that I've talked about is, none of these are massive things, right? All of these are smaller things that people tend to overlook. Only when you look at it as a large scale product in whole will all of these start to add up and be either good or bad UX. Now, those were all a bunch of, there's all a bunch of gyan on best practices, right? When you're actually doing all of this, keep in mind that we aren't our consumers. In most cases, you're not someone who is going to use your product. You're building something that someone else will use. And even if you're building something that you will use, you're naturally biased towards it because it was your idea. And maybe your friends and family told you it's a great idea, so you're more biased towards it. But you're not your consumer. You're not coming in with that hesitation, you're not coming in with doubt, you're not coming in with a complete lack of conviction. Keep that in mind from day one. It will put you in a different mindset of how people will perceive your product. Use your app, even if it's something as simple as a college project, right? Use it like someone who has never heard of it will use it. You will start to see how many things are red flags. Now, the right way to actually start design is not on a laptop at all. It is on paper. Because this might seem very counterintuitive, because how will you show things like color or how you know how much to show spacing or animations, all of that is lost, right? You just get simple layout. But that first level of feedback doesn't have to happen on color or animations or margins or spacing or any of that, right? It's just, can I show something in the right way? Now, one example that I want all of you to answer here is, imagine you're building Amazon, like an e-commerce app. and someone tells you that I want a checkout button that is there under the product, how will you decide the color of that checkout button? Shiny. Okay. Never heard that response before. Shiny button. No, color. So assume Amazon's branding is blue. Blue and yellow is what Amazon's branding is. What color will you keep the checkout button? Red. Okay. So vibrant color, yellow, depends on light or dark color, plain black, white, branding color maybe. So the typical response for something like this is one, I'll keep it in line with the brand's colors, which is blue or yellow. The second most common response is I'll keep it something that's not green because I don't want people thinking of money when they're buying something. I want them to actually buy the product. Third is I'll keep it green because I want people to see something positive. All of these are very subjective answers. The actual answer is simple because it's so simple you tend to overlook it. You need contrast. The color absolutely does not matter. If you go on the internet and find different e-commerce websites, you'll see all of them have varying colors. You'll see blacks, whites, reds, greens, all of that. You'll also see a lot of people telling you that these colors don't work, red doesn't work. People will think negative. Doesn't matter. You have McDonald's using red all over. You have KFC using red all over. It won't think negative of them. If you do, that's a different thing. But people generally don't. None of that matters if you get contrast right. So the highlight here was that color itself is not going to be relevant, because when you're designing on paper, if you can just show that the background is white and the button is black, that is enough to highlight contrast. Right? So forget everything that you know traditionally about design in terms of how things look. Just focus on how things work and how can you make sure that on paper you can show that. Now there are multiple styles that people use for wireframing, right? You might want to take a stencil which gives you phone screen layouts. You get those are very useful. Some people want to do fancy. See the bottom right there, people actually do paper animations. So you'll have multiple cutouts of paper and then you can show sliding and moving one layer. Some people do a very basic highlighting on printouts. All of this is completely fine, right? Everyone has their own style. What I optimally recommend is what's in the top right, where you have absolutely nothing. You have one pen and one pencil, because to get started, that is absolutely enough. You can have the highest quality apps, and this is something that Google uses internally as well, and their apps are high quality enough. So you can get the highest quality apps by just doing a simple paper and pen wireframing, because the idea is, sure, it's important, but it's not as important as the execution. And everyone has a million ideas a day. Only that execution takes an idea to an actual opportunity. And to get that idea across, you don't need anything more than just even writing words on a page. Yeah. When you're doing this wireframing, how do you approach it? Again, don't just start drawing rectangles on a paper and visualizing how your app is going to look. Plan a lot, right? Plan a little. Don't restrict yourself from creativity very early on. Don't figure out that this is how exactly I want my dashboard page to look, or this is how I want my checkout flow to look, because then you're restricting yourself very early and defeating the purpose. In the beginning, try to explore as many variations as possible, because you're doing it on paper, so each variation is only going to take you like 5 seconds to do. Right? Whereas on a laptop, it would take you at least half an hour to do one variation. So explore as many variations as possible, plan very little, and just visualize as much as you can. At the end of one wireframing session of about an hour, you will have a lot of different, like you'll have 5 types of logins, 5 types of checkout flows, 10 types of dashboards. Then you can just pick the best flow from each one. That is much more valuable than trying to go in with a mindset, this is how I want it to look. Just don't wireframe by thinking that this is what I want to have as an outcome. Set expectations of what you want from that outcome. Right? So going in with a mindset that says that I want to design a login flow is very different from saying that I want to design a login flow that captures 90% of users. Because now you're setting an expectation from that goal. You're assigning a value to what doesn't have a value. And just that mindset change will help you optimize for that expectation. And every decision that you then take will be in line with what that goal is. And while you're doing all of this, think how you want to achieve those goals, not what you want to do. One example that I keep going back to is, look at Flipkart when they launched, right, 2009 ish. By all means, and if you look at the theory, it backs this up. If you have a multi-billion-dollar American company coming to India, just launching their e-commerce brand in the country, and the budget like Amazon's, anything is possible, right? They did a bunch of advertising across. All of that data show that Flipkart should never have succeeded. Why did it? Any ideas? So possible theories are they had investors in India who were solid and could match Amazon's budget. I think Amazon's budget at the time could have probably been 100 investors in India at the time, because the VC scene was not very mature. So it was not budget. You might go in for the old example that I gave. Right? They do something cultural. Does the UI look different? It was not that either. Sorry? Marketing, again, marketing is a function of budget. Maybe you can get your marketing messaging better than Amazon's, but even if it's better and you reach one city, whereas Amazon is doing average and reaching 100 cities, you're still going to fall back. Right? Flipkart understood a very cultural aspect and pioneered the cash on delivery model in India. And again, this is another cultural factor like Ola. So we tend to, as Indians, we distrust almost everything we see. Whether this is your neighbor or your shopkeeper, everyone we don't trust. And this is not a wrong thing, it's just how we're wired culturally. Now, Amazon was coming to India with their American model and saying that you pay us first and then we'll send something to your house. Versus Flipkart saying we're going to give you something in your hand, see how it looks, see where you like it, and then pay us on delivery. Right? One very simple nuance, but if you look at how it's evolved over the years, Flipkart is like keeping up with Amazon. Right? The revenue is still a fraction of Amazon, but they're keeping up. Every e-commerce website that has launched since then also has COD as a model, because Flipkart pioneered it in India. Because when they went to design their e-commerce product, they didn't think of what they wanted. They think of how could we make it happen, right? We don't want to build an e-commerce product. We want to make sure people buy from us. Very different mindsets. But one is how do we do it versus what do we do. Approaching how do we do it will allow you to innovate when you're building, and your go-to market is probably going to be better if you take an approach like that. Experiment a lot. Right? If something sounds stupid as an idea, doesn't matter, just put it. Because you might get inspiration from something that doesn't sound right, and that will probably give you an insight into how to do it. So it's important that don't try to constrict yourself in the right way to do things. Experiment a lot, break things a lot. From those experiments and from those failures, you will have an outcome that probably works best for you. Right? And while you're doing all of this, remember that getting something out of the door is more important than getting something perfect out of the door. We tend to go into these perfectionist loops, and all of us do it, where only when something looks perfect or is 100% done will you actually launch it or give it to people to use. Getting it out is more important, because that inertia of getting something from an idea in your head to actual users is the biggest step. Once you get that first release out of the door, once you see actual people using it, not only will you have better traction, but you'll also be more motivated to keep building on it. Okay. Now, assuming you've done all of the wireframing part and you're actually going to the I'm going to design in Figma part of design. Okay. When you're doing screens and you're putting content into your designs, right? The default instinct, and every designer has gone through this. You're probably going through it right now, is to put dummy content on the site, right? Who's going to sit and write content or search images for something that you're designing? It works only if you're doing a hackathon and you have 24 hours to build what you're building. Because if you don't have the context of what is going to be in this dummy content that you're putting out, you're not going to take that into consideration when designing the rest of the app. What if you put like a large image in the layout, You don't actually bother to fill it, you just use a placeholder. So you put a large one there, and then you continue designing your screen. But the incoming image is low resolution, or it's not something that is important enough as the actual text. But you went ahead and designed it anyway. You put a large image because you thought, wow, large images look good, everyone's doing it. Wherever possible, talk to the team that you're working with. If you're working solo, then get your content there, and use real world content as much as possible, so that your design factors in how the end product is going to look, not just how you want it to look. Okay. When you're doing any call to action, which is a button that gets people moving from point A to point B, understand why you're doing it and how many of these are important. If on one website you have more than two calls to action, two important buttons, you've probably lost the plot. Wherever possible, you're optimizing for one use case. Build only for that. If you have two, not ideal, but okay, you can include it. But still optimize for one. Now, if you look at a lot of login pages, you'll see one button that is completely like filled out in color and one button that's an outline button, because they need those two important buttons, but they're directing your attention towards one. Think through all of these things. Can I bring that number down to one so that people's focus is just on that? And if I absolutely have to do two, can I still find a way to focus on one? Now, where this calls back, but again, I didn't include it on the deck, is one of the laws of UX that I spoke about initially. It talks about how there people have more options, they spend more time making a decision. Now, this is contrary to what we tend to think. Right? We tend to think that I'm going to give someone 10 options. Maybe one of them works for them, so they'll decide quicker. And that's natural. It's how default thought processes are. But the more options you have, the more time people spend making the decision. And the more time they're spending making a decision, the less time they're actually deciding and using. Okay, so just to wrap up, one is start by keeping the laws of UX in mind. So lawsofux.com, great website, walks you through each of them. Now, while you're walking through each of them, don't try to do it in a day, because all of these laws are they can be explained in one line, right? And they're as simple as grouping objects together makes them seem related, right? Or keeping space between similar objects makes them seem grouped. Very simple laws. One of them we spoke about earlier, right? More options means more decision time. But each of them is comprehensive because it has use cases, it has background, it has data, all of it linked to it. Don't try to understand and learn all of these laws in one day. You will not be able to learn the important part also. Instead, I would recommend spend 1 week learning one law of design. Right? In that 1 week, learn the actual law for one day. For a couple of days, read the background on the website itself about why that law works and where it can be applied. And for the next 3 or 4 days, try to find real world examples of it. And every app that you use, every website that you open applies all of these laws of UX. And it's just that we don't realize them because up to that point, you will not have gone into the theory of why is the button at the bottom of the page, why is it in the middle of the page. So spend 1 week on one law. By the end of 8 or 11, you will have understood a comprehensive view of how design is done. And in everyday objects, everyday uses around you, you will start to identify these patterns. So when you go on and you're doing it, whether you do it in college or at work, you will start to be able to apply those patterns very effortlessly without having to ever refer to the website again. Third, don't go straight to your laptop and start designing. You will waste a lot of time in revisions, or if something went wrong, or if you don't like how it turned out. Start by doing it on paper. Do as low quality as possible. Just get your idea out of your head onto a sheet first. Once you're satisfied with how that's turned out, then take it to a laptop, so that your time is saved and your process is more streamlined. When you're doing all of this, define an outcome from your project. This doesn't have to be an overarching, I want more people to use my app, but every task that you also do can have an individual outcome. Like we talked about login screens, can I capture 90% of my users coming on this page to actually signing up? And there are processes for all of these. Now, I spoke about how in the real world, we tend to optimize for speed and output. Unfortunately, that's the way that most corporate environments are built. If you build faster, it's better looked at versus someone who does it correctly. This is reinforced even more in startups, and I'm guilty of it in my company as well, because startups tend to have less time, less money. You can't really afford doing things correctly always. So if you are forced into that environment where your manager is telling you to do something fast rather than doing it right, that's okay, right? Not always are you able to do things the correct way, but at the back of your mind, or even better, on a notepad somewhere, put down the correct way to do something. Today you were told to build a checkout flow, and you had to do it in the quickest way possible. Put down how you would do it if you were given time. Two outcomes, right? Either one day you get time to actually do it correctly because there is a gap in your work, or someone who takes over after you move on can look at your notes and learn from there. Everyone benefits either way, right? So make sure you have those outcomes in mind. Make sure you're doing it correctly. Make sure you're putting down what is the right way to do it, even if you're not actually doing it yourself. And like I said, get it out of the door. That's more important than anything else, because if you go to look at design as a field, outcome is very subjective in design. Code is easier because either it works or it doesn't work. Like you can measure efficiency and all of that, but there is a defined outcome from it. 100% efficient, bug free. All of these are definitive outcomes. Design doesn't have an outcome like that, because what I perceive as good and what you perceive as good might just vary vastly. Because of that, it's always an ongoing process. Just look at an app like Swiggy, right? It just evolved so much over the past 1 year itself. Things keep moving around, things keep changing, size, shape, all of that, because it's an evolution that doesn't stop. So get it out there. Don't worry about how you want it to look. It will get to that point eventually. Just focus on constantly evolving, even if it's 10% at a time. Cool. Thanks so much. One last thing to close up. I've seen all of you, and I know this is going to happen here also. Put this up on LinkedIn. I met so and so person, and I learned the talks. What I would love for you to do is, everyone that I have seen so far, at least, has talked about the talk itself and your experience of meeting me in this case. This is adding absolutely zero value to LinkedIn, because people who see it, they're going to like it for sure because they're in your circles, but there's no takeaway from them. They don't give a shit if you met me, right? Instead, can you try to summarize what your learnings from here were? If there were none, that's completely okay as well. But if you did learn something, if you did take away something, if something that you heard made you think of something else, right? Try to put that down instead, because then someone who is reading your 10 paragraphs of post that you guys tend to write actually has a takeaway value from it, and that itself is a point. Don't try to make this too long. I know LinkedIn's algorithm and summarizer tends to push you towards writing longer posts. Bullet it if you absolutely have to write it really long, but as much as possible, try to be crisp, both from a LinkedIn perspective and in life itself. People you interact with, people you deal with, don't often have the time to go through long form content. I got an email from someone last week, which was similar to this, right? It was a college inviting me to speak. It was an 8-paragraph email. Right? It could have been one line: "Can you please come and speak at our college on so and so date?" Right? So, closing with this, right? When you're putting content out there, especially because of today, you can put this on LinkedIn. Try to be crisp. Try to summarize value for the reader. Don't just do something for the sake of doing it. Well, thanks so much. You can reach me on that email or on Twitter. Happy to chat about design. I don't do design anymore. I stopped like 4 years ago. I primarily work in strategy now, but happy to talk about engineering or design or entrepreneurship.
So any questions, like anything you'd like to ask to Faiz about design, product, engineering, anything at all?
Life.
No one? Okay.
Privately baad mein na?
There is one.
Acha.
You always have one.
This guy only.
So with the innovations of press keys that has been like recently involved.
Okay, so that mic is for the recording. I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. So I was telling that with the innovation of press keys that has been involved right now, like in the recent past. Now, like we spoke about the control flow action buttons. Like if we keep it less, it's better. Now the press keys has evolved to skip the login page, and it's started to take user data and like have a magnificent big impact on while you're using the applications. It also uses some of the user control flow
Are you
buttons.
talking about pass keys?
Yeah, press keys or pass keys, whichever. So, like, will it make a change in user perspective while you're using it? Because there are more of user flow buttons in that time also. Because it sometimes in Google one, it links with the device that you're using, the old device you're using, and it sends a link or a pop up to that.
Okay, so very very subjective question, right? Because a couple of things. One is passkeys aren't widely adopted yet. If you look at something like 2FA, which launched about 8 years ago, penetration is like 30% maximum. Right, when the company is forcing you to do 2FA, passkeys are going to have easily a 10-year adoption curve. Multiple reasons. One is because people's actual inertia to get from using what they're using to using a new product. Second is available hardware for everyone to reliably use passkeys. Face unlock and fingerprint unlock both have a standard that they have to adhere to allow for passkey verification. Most phones, especially budget phones, don't have those standards yet, so adoption is going to take a while. Uh, Assume adoption has picked up, right, and people are using it every day. You're still going to have additional data that needs to come in. The passkeys only solve for authentication, whereas what we talked about was data entry. So authentication is going to reduce password entry, but you still have to type your email to get the passkey.
Yeah.
That is what pairs with the biometric, and those two together authenticate you. Now, coming from someone who does product and completely disregarding UX for a second, I will want a lot more touch points with the user than just an email and a password. Right? As much as possible, I want to optimize. If I'm putting a form in front of them, I want as much data as possible, because that profiling that I can do of someone and form like an idea of their interests, how I can market better to them, is way more valuable than 2 seconds of their time. And I know this will cause drop off. I know conversions will be lower, but for the people who do convert, that value add will be much higher. So you're going to have people like me who don't go shit about the UX and optimize purely for business. Uh, so I don't think it will really change much, because I'm sure by the time passes see mass adoption, you'll have a ton of other data points that you can collect.
Um, Sir, as you talked about design and UX, so with context to that, what are the challenges or what are the things you are facing in tech industry or startup ecosystem, like most probably, with
In terms of-
context to design and UX?
Okay, so quick background about my journey, right? So I worked for 3 years as an engineer, then for 7 years as a designer, and then now for 3 years in strategy. Um, Someone like me tends to have like, because of a background in all three, I always want to do things the way I'm taught to do it, right? I was an engineer, so I want to write code the right way, and I was a designer, so I want to design things the right way. But now as a founder, I don't have the luxury to do so, right? I am optimizing for investors and optimizing for market. I have limited funds in the bank. I have to get things out. I think the biggest challenge, especially in anyone smaller than like a unicorn, is doing things the right way versus doing them quickly. Uh, this varies from company to company, because some people are going to optimize for growth because they have a lot of investors backing them. Some people are going to optimize for revenue because they'll rather have 10 users bringing in a lot of money than mass market adoption. So this challenge, and because all of you are going to be thrown into this challenge as well, right? Whether you end up working in engineering or you branch out into design or product, you're going to be part of this constant battle of doing what's right versus doing what's needed. And because of that answer not being a definitive outcome, and you're having to experiment a lot and figure out what's the best way, is I think the biggest individual challenge that most people will face in the industry.
So, how did you get involved with Google for startups?
Google for startups or Google in general?
Google in general or Google for startups?
Okay, so I started working when I was 17, and I built like a hobby project. Google had announced an upcoming feature for Android, and they had announced it in May, and they had given a release timeline of October. I started working on it the same night, and I released it in like a month. Now, this isn't because I was better than people at Google. It's just that Google has a lot of processes and red tape and approvals and legal stuff that they need to follow, uh, which is why it took them 6 months to get out. But I didn't have all of that. I could just get it out for people to actually start using in a week. But because I got a lot of people at Google who took notice and sort of reached out and asked if they could use some of the code and ideas and stuff. This was around 2012, and getting one foot in the door is like the biggest step. From there, I got involved in like 8 different Google programs over the years because of that one initial connection. But to your unasked question, I'll answer that as well. If all of you want to get involved, I would suggest getting started by attending community events. I know a lot of you already do, and a lot of you wanted to attend FS but couldn't. But getting started, just putting yourself out there and making the right connections is step one. Because while every community event is talking about talks and events and speakers and all that, none of that actually matters. It's all bullshit. Going to these places and meeting people is the biggest value add that you will see. A lot of people that I have met, a lot of opportunities that I have got is just from constantly interacting with people week in, week out, or even month in, month out. And I have a data to back this up, right? So 13 years of my career, I've never interviewed for a job ever. Every single job that I've got has been through a network. Right? So there is data to back that up. There is value that clearly you can get involved with companies like Google, Microsoft, all of these. That being said, I know that staying in New Bombay and going to Bombay for a community event is a massive headache. I stay in New Bombay and I do that, and I hate it already. So don't try to burn out and go for everyone. You will start hating it, and that will do more harm than good. Try starting a habit by, can I go once a month, or can I go once a quarter? Something easy and something achievable in the beginning, and then try to get more activity. Once you start going for a lot of these things, you will start meeting the right people, and even if you don't, you'll start meeting some people, but you'll start becoming a familiar face, right? And just by getting from being a nobody to being a familiar face is a big step.
So one more question.
Yes.
It's a bit design related. Sir, on what aspects or what indicators do you judge the success of a design?
Measurable outcome. So I do, like I talk about Educator, right? I don't care that it looks like really bad. It was getting 60 lakh in revenue a month a few years ago. That's a measurable outcome. But it doesn't always have to be monetary related. Again, if I have a landing page and I can drive email signups from that landing page, so that everyone who lands on the page, 8 out of 10 people sign up. That's a defined goal, because function of design is way more important than how it looks. So, like I say, when you're starting to do any design, any screen, figure out what's the objective of that screen, and how can you optimize for that outcome. Nothing else will matter. You'll have designers and senior designers who want to push you to doing things that look great or that look like the company brand, but most people are going to understand that the outcome is what matters more. The design you can keep evolving, the UI you can keep evolving, but from day one, if you're solving for the UX and solving for the business, that is success. So it will vary if on the size of the team, right? If you're like a 10-person team where you have different people in marketing, strategy, ops, design, developers, they need to sit together and have outcomes of what each of them is trying to establish. Right? And this is, a lot of people think that this starts with the founders of the company, because they have a certain vision of how this is going to be built. So they will tell people what features they want, and from there designers will pick it up, see how it looks, and then engineers will actually build it. This is why most startups fail. Founders may have the idea, but they are not going to pay for it. Users are going to pay for it. So the ideal flow of information should be either researchers or marketers talk to the users, figure out what they need, what problems they have, and what is going to make them start paying for this. That data then should go to a product manager or a designer who says, how can I turn these problems into features? Right? And then those features go to an engineer for actually building and testing. If you're a 1-person team, this changes massively, because you're doing all of those functions yourself, or even a 2-person team. I'd say the biggest mistake that smaller teams make is asking friends and family for advice. We are very non-confrontational as Indians, right? We hate saying your product is bad or being honest about how bad an experience is. Uh, because of that, your immediate circles is going to tell you something is good when it's not. So don't make that mistake. Figure out who is your actual audience going to be. Understand the difference between consumer and customer. Uh, Success isn't just 100 people using it if you can't afford to pay for it. If your server costs are not being able to be met by your users, it's pointless building it. So the difference between consumer and customer should be understood. Both types of users should be spoken to, and then that data should be used to build, without, of course, going through the process of formal interviews or any of that. And then as you scale your team up, as you add more people, you need to start formalizing the entire process.
So, considering the ever changing nature of technology, for example, you're starting to design a product today and you're set to release it after a year or so. So, how do you assess its adaptability to technology, to competition, or how do you assess that it will work the same way think it will after a year or so when you release it actually?
So that's what I touched on this, right? That don't spend so much time from building to releasing. Set a shorter time goal. That say you're building. Give me an example. What are you building?
For example, a clothing brand.
Okay. Now imagine you're building a clothing brand that you want to launch 2 years from now, and you're concerned about how people's patterns will change. Right? Will they still be using apps? Will they switch to mobile web? All of these things will change. You should ideally be, and you want a bunch of features, right? You want ads in that, you want stories in that, you want influencers posting their pictures with clothes. That's the entire product. Can you just get out a simple app which lets people see and check out in 1 quarter or in 2 quarters, 6 months, right? 6 months is a short enough window that trends will not significantly change, but it's also long enough window that you can actually build. So don't think of how your product is going to look when it's done. Think of the smallest version that you can get out in front of people. And then when things change over time, you can adapt gradually. Going into a rabbit hole where you start building and say that I'm going to release 1 year from now, 2 years from now, that thought process itself is a mistake. And because, like you said, a lot will change and nobody can predict how it's going to change. If in December or November, a couple of years ago, just before LLMs launched for the public, if someone had gone to start building an AI product, they would have not been able to predict how ChatGPT is going to come and change everything. Right? The important thing was to figure out 1 month what can I launch without seeing significant change, and then adapt from there. Google started out as a search company. Most of the revenue is now from ads. Right? If they had optimized for I want to build a search company 20 years from now, it would not have worked. They just launched what they were good at, core functionality. Then they launched Gmail from there, which was not related to what they did, but it was a need of the hour. Then they launched YouTube. They acquired YouTube. They acquired Android. They launched ads. All of these were steps along that journey. Right? The company evolved from one simple idea. So get that one simple idea out, and then add things on top of that as trends change.
So, sir, my question is, what makes a design suitable, sustainable, and reusable in the same organization again for some different functionality?
Design systems are a whole thing. So design systems are a concept where I will design one button, and then I'll use that same button in multiple places. There's no, it's not suitable. There's no science or theory behind it. It's just an approach of doing design. And again, this is only something that larger teams can afford. Most small teams and individual designers can't afford to do design systems because they take a lot of time. The general idea with design systems is that before actually designing the product, I will design for components. I will not look at how a screen looks or how a flow looks or where in the app this is going to be. I just know that I need one type of button, which is rectangular. I need one circular button. I need one outlined button. I need it to come in two different shapes. It will have states where it's active, hovered, or disabled. You just think of it separate from your actual product. And you design all of this first. Then when you're doing the actual product design, you don't have to actually design, which is drag and drop these elements into your project.
So, can this kind of situation, like if I have to take a example, Amazon as a service, and then we also have Amazon Prime, right?
Yeah.
So the UI changes pretty much a lot. Even does the functionality.
Yes.
But what makes a user in this case, apart from the name, identify that these belong from the same organization?
They don't. How many people know YouTube belongs to Google?
Uh, color scheme again.
YouTube and Google do not share a color scheme. So this is intentional from a lot of these companies. Sometimes they don't want to have this association. Sometimes they are different organizations. Sometimes they're different teams within an organization. So having an organization-wide design system will change based on how large the organization is. For 90% of companies out there, which are like 50, 100,000 employees, it is okay to have one design system across the entire organization. The moment you start crossing those numbers and you're a massive organization with very different needs based on products, based on geographies, all of that, you cannot have one comprehensive design system, right? Then what starts happening is you start having multiple design systems per team, per geography. Google Pay in India is a whole different product from Google Pay in the rest of the world because it's a geography in India. We have UPI here.
It changes, yeah.
So these things start to change across the organization. Then what they try to do is they try to keep at least the branding comprehensive, which is exactly what you said. The logo is the only thing that links them. So they can try to keep the branding comprehensive. They try to keep the systems homogeneous, not exact, which means systems will look the same. Amazon's fonts will be the same across both products. Their vague idea of sizings of buttons and all may be the same, but they will not look identical. That's the best that I think large companies can do. And then there's a third case where they knowingly dissociate themselves from each other. Right? Most people, I don't know about you guys, but most people who are interested in cars know that every luxury car company out there, or most of them, belong to Volkswagen. Right? When the first time you learn that, you're probably wondering what the hell is happening because Volkswagen is what's traditionally considered a boring company compared to like a Lamborghini. Now, this is very knowingly kept as two completely different identities because the target audience varied, right? So brands do this as well. Even tech brands, they sometimes vary how their product looks and feels because the kind of user who's interacting with that product is going to be a whole different user. So they isolate everything, the colors, the brands, even the logos in YouTube example, uh, from each other because of how different it is. If you look at AWS or Mechanical Turk, both of which are Amazon products, they look like terrible. They just feels like it's out of the 90s because the audience there is very different from an Amazon consumer audience or from an Amazon Prime Video audience. Uh, so that's how they sort of interact and try to maintain as much as possible, but it just breaks that scale.